Marcy, welcome. Let me tell some words about you. She's
Here
an
we go.
early development specialist, an author of Parenting for Peace, raising the next generation of peacemakers. She really wants to change the world, like we all do. But for her, we need to have a generation hardwired for peace, with brain-based capacities for self-regulation, empathy, trust, imagination, and of course, intelligence. The title of her talk is Attuned Conception, Harnessing the Simple Power of Presence. This is an extraordinary theme. Marcy, thank you. You're such a friend, and I'm so happy to share this moment with you. You have the
Oh,
floor.
well,
And
hello.
remember, write your questions on the chat because there will be some 5 minutes afterwards. So
And
stay
to
tuned.
enhance my own ability for presence, I'm sliding my window over so I cannot see the chat right now. So I will trust you guys to deal with it. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Carla. It's so good to be with you here. Since this is a talk about something seemingly so simple and about presence, I'm not doing any PowerPoint slides. Since we're usually an intimate group here, I would like you to just imagine that you're sitting around this candlelit table with me with these roses. It's telling me I switched to Chinese. Did I switch to Chinese? I did not
No,
switch to
thank you.
Chinese. I, uh, I have a little window here. No, I want English. Thank you. Okay. I don't know what happened there. Um, anyway, so it's just a delight to be here with you. So the title of my little contribution here is Attuned Conception, Harnessing the Simple Power of Presence. Well, in that title are two huge concepts. The concept of conception as a process to bring awareness to bring attunement to presence, and the notion that that presence in and of itself could have some sort of power. Now, both of those ideas wildly challenge conventional paradigms. And just like most of what we're talking about in this summit, right? Pre and perinatal psychology does. And in 20 minutes, I'm certainly not going to be thoroughly dismantling any paradigms, but maybe I can put a few hairline cracks in here and there. So I want to start with the second idea first, looking at how presence, the act of focused, directed attention, can maybe change the field around conception and have a positive influence on that newly conceived being. I'm going to share a very few bits of fascinating research findings, all pointing to the power of this kind of presence. First of all, how many of you, by a show of hands, and I won't be able to see because I have a different view on my screen, would agree with me that we are in the midst of an attention crisis in today's world? The obstacle, okay, thanks. I got two hands here. The obstacles to focusing our attention on any one single activity or thought or action have never been so formidable. To put aside the phone or the smartphone or the tablet, to sign off social media, this is like a subversive act these days. So the capacity for pure, focused attention is atrophying all around us. So this is where, of course, a mindfulness practice, like we began with this morning, um, is such a boon and can be such a balm to keep that muscle, to keep that capacity for attention robust. Second, I just have to throw in, after yesterday's sessions, I decided I needed to say something. When we're discussing the notion of very early life and of any sort of memory or sentience beginning at conception, for those of us in the US, I feel that I have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. That is last month's Alabama Supreme Court's ruling that an 8-cell embryo is a person. You know, those of us in the prenatal psychology field have been equally loathed by both sides of the abortion debate, and this gets into deep philosophical and scientific territory that would definitely take us off topic and gobble up my 20 minutes. So I did write quite a substantive paper on the topic called Abortion and Our Collective Soul that I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested in reading it. I have a 7-page version and a 20-page version. So if you want to email me, drop me a private message on Facebook, I am happy to share that with you. So starting with that second idea about the power of attention, I'm going to start with a few snippets of research. Larry Dossey, in his 1999 book, Reinventing Medicine, wrote that at that time, there were about 150 studies supporting what scientists call non-local mind-matter consciousness effects, meaning how directed intention can have an effect on distant biological systems, meaning that aren't inside your own body. Things like plants, bacteria, human cells, even entire humans in a distant location. In the literature, this area of study is referred to as distant mental influence on living systems, acronym, everything has to have an acronym these days, DMILS. So by 2015, when Dean Radin published about this topic, about these studies in a peer-reviewed medical journal, there were many, many more, hundreds and hundreds of these studies. So I'm going to show you, or nutshell for you, I should say, a few classic examples, classic being the euphemism for old or vintage, but they are my favorites. They are ones that really snapped me to attention around this whole idea. Oh my gosh, I'm already running long. Bernard Grad at McGill University had patients who were suffering from varying severities of depression hold vials of water for 30 minutes. Then that water was put on houseplants, identical houseplants, and then those plants' growth was monitored carefully. And there was a measurable difference in the growth of the plants that correlated very directly with the various mental and mood states, severities of the vial holders. Sticking with the concept of water, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Masaru Emoto's beautiful studies on the power of words and thoughts and even music to affect the molecular organization of water and its symmetry, its coherence when frozen into crystals. He put distilled water into vials and applied different short messages to the vials. Anybody out there? Can I see slide number 1? There, we had a pre-planned idea that we would, yay! So messages such as "you fool," oops, it went away, or "I hate you," resulted in this kind of frozen crystal, messy, disorganized, what, you know, of course, subjectively we would call not beautiful or ugly. Now, the message, you know, they would put other messages that were positive messages, such as truth or love, and those resulted in more symmetrical crystals. Now, the message that consistently produced the most beautiful, symmetrical, coherently structured, this is so key, coherence, water crystals when frozen was. Next slide, please. Thank you. So that's the difference in the look of those frozen crystals. So this finding directly lines up with research from the field of positive psychology about the life-enhancing power of gratitude. Okay, you can take that away now. That's the end of the slides for today. So the very first person I learned about was Cleve Baxter, and I'm going to try to shorten this because I really want to stay on time here and have us have a few minutes to talk at the end. Cleve Baxter was a CIA interrogator, and he instituted the CIA's polygraph division, which is still active to this day. And he developed a test that became the worldwide standard for judging polygraph test results. Now, his secretary one day brought a Dracaena plant into the lab, and he had this sort of playful impulse, which I really believe is a true scientist at work, right? Playing with reality, playing with what might we discover with a completely with no agenda, no even hypothesis. He just figured he'd put electrodes on the leaf of the plant and see how long it took the water to go up that cane trunk of the plant and out to the leaves. So he hooked it up to the polygraph. And what he saw, though, was not what he was expecting. It was making tracings like a person would hooked up to a lie detector test. And the way polygraph works is when a person feels a threat to their well-being, physiologically, they can't control it, and the pen traces, right? So he began to think about ways that he could threaten the well-being of the plant. And so the idea came to him to burn one of the leaves with a match. And here's what he said. He said, I didn't verbalize, I didn't touch the plant, I didn't touch the equipment. The only new thing that could have been a stimulus for the plant was my mental image, yet the plant went wild. The pen jumped right off the top of the chart. So he said his consciousness changed irrevocably that day. He devoted himself the rest of his professional life to studying this phenomenon that he came to call primary perception. And he studied it with many forms of life, bacteria, eggs, and most notably for our purposes today, human cells. He would take white blood cell scrapings from the inside of a person's cheek, put them in a sterilized test tube, put gold electrodes in there, and then document how they responded in step with their donors' activities. The people who he took the cells from were keeping little diaries of exactly what they were doing. The furthest distance that was tested was 300 miles. And at that point, they stopped. They realized they were dealing with non-local consciousness effects. Now, the activity, again, very applicable to what we're talking about today, the activity that caused the cells to react most intensely, to trace what Baxter called the wildest, most sawtooth recordings, was the act of lovemaking. And then I can't leave this topic without just mentioning William Browd, because he was truly a pioneer, experimental psychologist, and he studied, he did it within the human realm, where one subject would be in one location and through intention would change the heart rate or respiration or blood pressure of another person in a different room. So this whole area, of course, is constantly dismissed by skeptics as pseudoscience, much as a lot of prenatal psychology has been. And yet, as Thomas said yesterday, he gets a lot less pushback these days. Sounds like it's less fun for him. Anyway, but it does challenge our culturally accepted framework of how our world works, of how we work as humans within that world. So those were just some ideas on attention. So to the idea of attuned conception and bringing that presence, that attention to conception. Gabor Mate calls attention a form of loving. To give attention to someone is a form of loving. And again, these days, more so than ever before, there's so many things pulling at our attention. So to bring your full focus and attention to someone is truly a form of loving that sometimes takes work. So to pay attention at conception is one of the first opportunities to love that incoming being. Now, in the Cartesian materialistic way of thinking, again, our conventional paradigm, the size of something is related to its importance and to its significance. And there's this tendency to think, well, how could anything have a lasting impact so very early when there is just 2 or 4 or 8 or 16 cells? When there's so much time later for input, for beneficial influences. But I would suggest, with just a small shift, a reframing of how we look at that, wouldn't it make more sense, or at least some sense, that the influence of a very positive or very negative environmental message would be relatively much more powerful upon a very small system at the very beginning, when each cell division will replicate that cell's knowledge again and again. So let's spend this last few minutes here on this idea that conception circumstances would in any way alter someone's life course, let alone be imprinted or remembered in any way. Now, I'm confident that several other folks during this summit are discussing prenatal memory, so hopefully there's a broader discussion of how that works, what the implications are. If we have any time at the end, I'll share a very personal perspective related to my own conception as an adopted person, from a session with a healer I had just like 2.5 weeks ago, after a lifelong seeking of health. And also even an aha I had just yesterday during Brian Kolb's talk. Anyway, anything philosophical or theoretical aside, I'd like to just strip this down to a simple, practical picture of what this attunement at conception might look like. This is not a new idea. For millennia, it has been taught in ancient spiritual traditions. It was written thousands of years ago in the Vedas that conception is a moment of greatest importance, that this process of conception captures facets of the parent's consciousness and lays that portrait down like a gossamer watermark on the incoming being, an intangible yet lifelong fundamental organizing principle underlying all else, including DNA and everything that will come later. So I want to share with you an excerpt from one of my very favorite, and I think two little known books on prenatal psychology. It's called The Child of Your Dreams, by Laura Huxley, who was married to the great author and visionary Aldous Huxley, and who I was so privileged to be friends with in the last years of her life. This is about that invisible, life-shaping moment of conception. In some kind of unknowable alchemy, a miraculous quantum leap occurs. From a predictable biological happening springs the beginning of a human life. An individual who is capable of loving and hating, of thinking and dreaming, of making wars and composing symphonies. This is the moment of beginning, and all beginnings carry in themselves something hopeful and happy. Beginnings should always be accompanied by enthusiasm and good wishes and a loving care and faith and thoughts that all is well and all shall be well. Yet consider what most often happens instead. The most basic and sacred moment of an individual's life is surrounded by the most hurtful of all human attitudes, indifference. This inattention does not occur out of any ill will. The actual time of conception, which usually takes place 5 or 6 hours after intercourse, is relegated to indifference and unconsciousness, treated as any routine bodily process, like digestion, for example. A miracle happens, but nobody is there to witness it. We become too busy with the business of life, too tired, doing the laundry, or just not confident enough to think one is able to experience such a subtle and minute process. A miracle happens, but nobody is there to watch, to love, to care. So no cumbersome rituals are needed. We don't have to sprinkle rose petals. We don't have to smudge with sage or burn incense unless that has meaning for the parents to be. Just simple, powerful presence in the awareness that you are participating in the most important, auspicious, and mysterious collaboration of all, inviting new life to grow within your shared life and within the mother's body. Attuned conception is simply a loving, present welcome.
Oh, Marcy.
My stopwatch says 20 minutes on the dot. I am not kidding you.
On the dot, and so glorious, so wonderful. Thank you so much. You have questions here, and one comes from Dr. Shoker, Hakan Shoker. I'm not pronouncing your word. Okay. And it says, "Dear Marcy, what you're talking about is quite scary and might change the total concept of prenatal checks and guidance. Also, it is very stressful to know that anybody in the birthing room thinking in a negative way might affect the baby and the birth itself. Can you comment on this specific effect in birth? Shall we be scared about what we think in birth, and will it affect the birth?"
Well, I feel like there's others who will be speaking of this and are probably more more knowledgeable about this, including yourself, Laura. But I'm going back to what I said about the effects on a very small system when it's just beginning. That's what we're talking about in this session. So when you have created a being that is robust in health and has that coherence of structure, of all those cells starting from the very beginning with such a vibrant health, and you yourself as the mother and your parenting partner, your husband, your partner, being in the birthing room, holding that space, I believe that consciousness can change anything. And so, hopefully you've chosen a birthing team, but I do believe, I hope this doesn't come across as scary. I do know that the idea of conscious conception is possibly the most resisted aspect of everything we ever talk about in prenatal psychology. I've definitely experienced that. I do want to share that I'm 68 years old. I have been trying to heal all of my adult life. I went to my first therapist at 21. And I have done so many modalities, primal, I've done it all. I was at my chiropractor 2.5 weeks ago. I've been having fatigue issues and a variety of things. And this amazingly gifted healer, she came up with something. She reads your body like a computer running all kinds of different programs. Profoundly deep, unrequited love housed in the epigenetic cellular memory. This goes back to my birth mother conceiving me not out of love, out of sexual passion. And there's nothing wrong with that specifically. And my aha that I had during Brian's session yesterday, when he talked about the Quebec ice storm, I thought, oh my gosh, I was conceived in an ice within and carried within an ice storm because my birth father was absolutely cold. And I think the unrequited love might also be my mother's unrequited love with my birth father. So I just want to say this is how lifelong and how profound these things are.
Oh,
And I
Marcy.
guess it can be scary. you know, a lot of reality is
Scary, but
scary.
enlightening and revealing. I mean, truth always sets us free. There's always freedom coming when we know those concepts. But boy, what a dive, what a deep dive. Our very first cell already gave to the others the exact atmosphere in which we were conceived. My, oh my. There's so much we can offer children if we would go towards conception, aware of all that and loving it. But
Yeah.
thank you, Marcy. It was wonderful having you with us.